There's a special kind of fear that comes when you realize you can't protect your child anymore. Cole Brown felt it the day his bank account hit zero and his daughter looked at him with worry in her eyes instead of trust. The widowed father had lost everything in the market crash, his savings, his home, his sense of security. With nowhere else to turn, he drove to his late grandfather's remote Montana land with his daughter, planning to dig a bunker and start fresh. On the third day, his shovel struck something buried deep. Not rock, not pipe. Solid steel beneath concrete, hidden for decades. Behind it lay a door sealed since World War II. What was his grandfather hiding? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The truck's headlights cut through the pre-dawn darkness as Cole Brown guided the aging Ford up the overgrown access road. Beside him, his daughter sat silent, her face reflected in the passenger window. She hadn't said much since they'd left the city 3 days ago, and Cole couldn't blame her. What do you say to your father when he's lost everything and decided the only path forward is backward? The road narrowed as pine trees pressed in from both sides, branches scraping against the truck's paint. Cole didn't care. The truck was paid off, one of the few things that was truly his anymore. Everything else had been sold, liquidated, or seized. His downtown office with the view of the financial district, the house in the suburbs where he'd raised his daughter and buried his wife, the retirement accounts he'd spent 25 years building. Gone. All of it gone, in 18 months of cascading failures that started with bad investments and ended with his brokerage license suspended and his reputation in ruins. "Dad, slow down," his daughter said quietly. "You nearly hit that tree." Cole eased off the accelerator, realizing his hands were gripping the steering wheel hard enough to hurt. He flexed his fingers, trying to release the tension that had lived in his shoulders for months now. "Sorry, sweetheart. Just tired." She turned to look at him, and in the dashboard's glow, he saw her mother's eyes staring back. The same green-gold color, the same way of looking right through his excuses to the truth beneath. "We can turn around," she said. "It's not too late. We could find an apartment. I could pick up more shifts at the hospital, and you could—" "Could what?" Cole interrupted, more sharply than he intended. "Stock shelves? Drive for a rideshare company? I'm 58 years old, and I can't get a job in my own field because I lost other people's money along with my own." The silence that followed felt heavy enough to crack the windshield. Cole wanted to apologize, to explain that the anger wasn't meant for her, but the words stuck in his throat, the way everything seemed to stick these days. "I'm sorry," he finally managed. "That wasn't fair." "No, it wasn't," she agreed, but her voice was gentle. "But I understand." The road opened into a clearing just as the sun broke over the eastern mountains, flooding the valley with golden light. Cole stopped the truck and killed the engine. Before them stretched 40 acres of wild Montana land, untouched and unchanged since his grandfather's death 5 years ago. The cabin sat in the middle distance, small and weathered, but still standing. Beyond it, mountains rose like ancient sentries, their peaks still dusted with last winter's snow despite it being early summer. "I'd forgotten how beautiful it was," his daughter whispered. Cole had too. He'd only been here a handful of times as a child, summer visits that felt like stepping into another world. His grandfather had been a quiet man, spare with words, but generous with time. They'd walked these woods together, fished in the creek that ran along the southern property line, sat on the cabin's porch and watched the stars emerge in a sky unmarred by city lights. His grandfather had served in World War II, though he never talked about it. The uniform hung in the cabin's closet, perfectly preserved, but the stories behind it remained locked away. When Cole had asked as a boy, his grandfather would just shake his head and say, "Some things are better left in the past, son." Now, looking at the cabin, Cole wondered what other things his grandfather had left behind. They spent the morning unloading the truck, camping gear, tools, boxes of canned goods, water filtration equipment, everything they'd need for an extended stay off the grid. Cole's plan was simple, at least in outline. Clear a spot on the property, dig a bunker, create a secure place where they could wait out whatever came next, economic collapse, social unrest, or just his own need to disappear for a while. He hadn't worked out all the details, but that was part of the appeal. For the first time, in years, he was doing something with his hands instead of staring at computer screens full of numbers that no longer added up. The cabin's interior smelled of dust and old wood, but it was structurally sound. One main room with a kitchenette, a small bedroom, and a bathroom with a composting toilet his grandfather had installed in the 90s. Solar panels on the roof still worked, providing enough electricity for lights and the ancient refrigerator that hummed to life when Cole flipped the breaker. No internet, no cell signal, just the wind in the pines and the distant call of a hawk hunting breakfast. His daughter claimed the bedroom, while Cole said he'd sleep on the couch. In truth, he wasn't sleeping much anyway. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the faces of his clients, retired teachers, small business owners, people who'd trusted him with their life savings, people he'd failed. By afternoon, they'd made the cabin livable. His daughter had a gift for turning any space into a home, something she'd inherited from her mother. Small touches, wildflowers in a mason jar, curtains opened to let in light, their mother's old quilt spread across the bed, transformed the austere cabin into something warm. "I found Grandpa's things," she called from the bedroom. "They're all still here." Cole joined her. She'd opened the closet to reveal not just the uniform, but boxes of personal effects. Photo albums, letters bound with string, and a large metal trunk with his grandfather's initials stamped on the lid. They spent the rest of the afternoon going through it all. Photos of a young man in uniform, serious and lean, standing with other soldiers whose names were lost to time. Letters from his grandmother, written during the war years, full of news from home and longing for his return. And deeper, in the trunk, beneath layers of carefully folded clothes, something unexpected, a hand-drawn map of the property. Cole spread the map on the kitchen table. His grandfather's draftsmanship was meticulous, every tree and rock formation marked with precision. Property boundaries were clearly delineated, the creek traced in blue ink, the cabin represented by a small square. But in the northeast corner, where Cole remembered only forest and wild undergrowth, his grandfather had drawn another square and labeled it in careful block letters. "Foundation, do not disturb." "What do you think that means?" his daughter asked, leaning over his shoulder. Cole traced the notation with his finger. "I don't know. Maybe he started building something and never finished, an old storage shed, or maybe he didn't want anyone finding something," she suggested. They looked at each other, and despite everything, the losses, the fear, the uncertainty, Cole felt a spark of curiosity ignite in his chest. It was the first time in months he'd felt anything besides regret and exhaustion. That evening, they shared a simple dinner of soup heated on the propane stove. His daughter tried to engage him in conversation about the plan, about how long they'd stay, about what came next. But Cole's mind kept returning to the map and that cryptic notation. His grandfather had been a deliberate man. Nothing he did was without purpose. After his daughter went to bed, Cole sat on the porch with the map and a flashlight. The night air was cool, scented with pine and the promise of distant rain. He studied the property boundaries, calculating distances and directions. The marked location was about a quarter-mile from the cabin, in a dense stand of old-growth forest. What had his grandfather built there? And why mark it, "Do not disturb," on a map that was clearly meant to be found? Cole thought about his own life, about the secrets he'd kept from his daughter in those final months before everything collapsed. The way he'd hidden the mounting debts, the regulatory inquiries, the knowledge that everything was coming apart. He'd told himself he was protecting her. But really, he'd just been ashamed. Maybe his grandfather had felt the same way, about whatever lay buried in those woods. The next morning dawned clear and bright. Cole woke early, his mind already made up. Before he started digging the bunker, before he made any other plans, he needed to know what his grandfather had hidden in the northeast corner of the property. His daughter found him at the kitchen table, the map spread before him, a cup of instant coffee cooling in his hands. "You're going to look for it," she said. It wasn't a question. "I have to know," Cole replied. She studied him for a long moment, then nodded. "Then I'm coming with you." They gathered supplies, water, the map, a compass, and the basic tools Cole had brought for the bunker project. The walk through the forest was harder than Cole expected. Years of sitting at a desk had left him soft, and the terrain was unforgiving. His daughter, younger and fitter, moved with easy grace, while Cole struggled to keep pace. But eventually, using the map and compass, they found the spot his grandfather had marked. There was nothing visible, just forest floor covered in decades of pine needles and undergrowth. If not for the map, they would have walked right past it. "Maybe he changed his mind," his daughter suggested. "Maybe there's nothing here." But Cole was already kneeling, brushing away the surface debris. His fingers found something solid beneath the organic layer. Not rock, something flat and even. "Hand me the shovel," he said. She passed it to him without a word, and Cole began to dig. The third day of digging began like the others. Cole woke before dawn, his muscles aching from yesterday's work, and made his way to the excavation site while his daughter still slept. The physical labor had become almost meditative, the rhythm of the shovel biting into earth, the methodical clearing of dirt, the slow revelation of what lay beneath. He'd been right about the solid surface. It wasn't rock. It was concrete, poured deliberately and smoothly, extending at least 6 feet in every direction from where he'd started. Yesterday, he and his daughter had cleared enough to see the scope of it. This wasn't a foundation for a shed. This was something else entirely. The morning air was cool, mist rising from the forest floor as sunlight filtered through the pines. Cole positioned himself at the center of the concrete slab and drove his shovel downward with force. The blade struck something that rang out with a metallic clang that echoed through the quiet woods. He froze, then knelt and brushed away the thin layer of dirt he'd just loosened. Steel, rust-pitted but solid, the unmistakable surface of metal buried beneath the concrete. His heart began to race. This wasn't accidental. Someone, his grandfather, had poured concrete over steel, then buried it all under 3 feet of earth and 70 years of forest growth. Cole worked faster now, clearing dirt from around the metal. Surface. It took an hour to expose enough to understand what he was looking at. A hatch, square, approximately 4 feet on each side, with heavy hinges on one end and what looked like a locking mechanism on the other. And there, barely visible through the rust and corrosion, stenciled numbers, 1943 K7. "Dad." He turned to find his daughter standing at the edge of the excavation, 2 coffee mugs in her hands, and concern written across her face. "What is that?" she asked, moving closer. "I don't know," Cole admitted, "but it was built in 1943. She set down the coffee and knelt beside him, running her fingers over the stenciled numbers. World War II. Grandpa would have been, what, 22? 23? 23? Cole confirmed. He enlisted in 42, right after Pearl Harbor. They stared at the hatch in silence, the implications settling over them like the morning mist. This wasn't something his grandfather had built casually or recently. This was from the war years, buried, deliberately and marked with military precision. "Should we call someone?" his daughter asked. "The county? The historical society?" Cole considered it. The reasonable thing would be to report the find, let authorities or historians handle it. But something held him back. His grandfather had marked this location on a private map with explicit instructions not to disturb it. If he'd wanted it found by authorities, he would have reported it himself during the 70 years he'd owned this land. "Let me try to open it first," Cole said. "See what's inside. Then we'll decide." His daughter looked skeptical but didn't argue. They returned to the cabin for better tools, pry bars, penetrating oil, wire brushes. Cole also grabbed his phone, checking it uselessly for signal before remembering they were miles from the nearest cell tower. He'd have to document this the old-fashioned way. Back at the site, they spent hours working on the hatch. The locking mechanism was seized solid, rust having fused the components together. Cole applied penetrating oil, let it soak, then carefully worked the pry bar into the mechanism. His daughter used wire brushes to clear away decades of corrosion. The sun had climbed to its zenith when something finally gave. A grinding sound, metal on metal, and the locking mechanism shifted a fraction of an inch. "Got it," Cole breathed, applying more pressure. With a shriek of protesting metal, the lock disengaged. Cole positioned the pry bar under the hatch's edge and heaved. Nothing. He tried again, putting his full weight on the bar. The hatch shifted, rose an inch, then fell back. "Together," his daughter said, grabbing her own pry bar. They counted to 3 and pulled in unison. The hatch rose 6 inches, a foot, then swung fully open on hinges that somehow still functioned after 8 decades underground. Cool air rushed up from the darkness below, carrying the scent of concrete and stale air, but no rot, no moisture. Cole aimed his flashlight into the opening. A steel ladder descended into darkness, rungs still solid despite their age. "How deep do you think it goes?" his daughter whispered. Cole counted the visible rungs. 12 feet, maybe 15. They looked at each other, and Cole saw his own mixture of fear and curiosity reflected in his daughter's eyes. Every instinct told him this was a moment that would change things, that some doors, once opened, couldn't be closed again. "I'm going down," he said. "Not alone, you're not." Cole wanted to argue, to protect her the way he'd failed to protect her from the financial collapse, but the determination in her voice stopped him. She was 28 years old, a registered nurse who'd seen more of life's harsh realities than he wanted to admit. She didn't need his protection, she needed his trust. "Okay," he agreed. "But I go first. Test the ladder, make sure it's safe." He lowered himself through the hatch, his hands gripping the cold steel rungs. The ladder held firm, showing no signs of weakness. He descended slowly, his flashlight clamped between his teeth, until his feet touched solid ground. The chamber was small, perhaps 10 feet by 10 feet, with concrete walls and a surprisingly dry floor. Military surplus shelving lined 3 walls, and everything was organized with meticulous precision. Crates stacked and labeled, boxes arranged by size and content, all of it preserved in the cool, dry air like a time capsule sealed at the height of World War II. "Cole?" His daughter's voice echoed from above. "Are you okay?" "Yeah," he called back, removing the flashlight from his mouth. "Come down. You need to see this." She descended carefully, and when she reached the bottom, they stood together in the beam of their flashlights, trying to process what they were seeing. The nearest crate bore stenciled letters. U.S. War Department. The date beneath it read 1943. Cole found a pry bar among the tools they'd brought and carefully opened the 10 crate. Inside, wrapped in waxed paper that had somehow survived 8 decades, were rations. Military field rations, still sealed, preserved in the underground chamber's stable environment. "Why would Grandpa bury food?" his daughter asked. Cole didn't answer. He was already moving to the next crate, and the next. More rations, water purification, tablets, medical supplies, all dated between 1943 and 1945. And then, on the lowest shelf against the far wall, something different, a leather-bound logbook wrapped in waterproof oilcloth. His hands trembled as he unwrapped it. The leather was dry but intact, and when he opened the cover, his grandfather's handwriting looked back at him from the first page. Site K7, Operational Log. Guardian, Howard Brown, January 1943, Cole read the words aloud, and they seemed to hang in the stale air of the chamber. Guardian. Site K7. Operational log. These weren't the words of a simple soldier or a farmer storing emergency supplies. This was something organized, something official. "What does that mean?" his daughter asked. "Guardian?" Cole turned the page, reading quickly. The entries were brief, almost coded. References to protocols and contingency plans and national security directives. Mentions of other sites, K3, K9, K12, scattered across Montana and Wyoming. And throughout it all, his grandfather's careful notes about maintaining the site, checking supplies, waiting for orders that apparently never came. The last entry was dated March 1968. No contact from director in 14 months. Others going silent. Will continue to maintain site but cease active monitoring. This chapter seems to be closing, though I was never told how or why. Cole looked up from the logbook to find his daughter staring at a locked metal cabinet he hadn't noticed before. It was built into the wall, heavy-duty construction with a combination lock that looked newer than everything else in the chamber. "Dad," she said quietly, "I think there's more to find." The locked cabinet haunted Cole's thoughts for the rest of that day. They'd emerged from the chamber as the sun began its descent, both of them silent, processing what they'd discovered. His grandfather hadn't just been a veteran, he'd been part of something organized, something that had continued long after the war ended. That evening, while his daughter prepared a simple dinner, Cole sat at the kitchen table with the logbook, reading through every entry. His grandfather's handwriting remained steady throughout the years, but the tone shifted. The early entries were crisp and professional, full of technical details about supply, inventories, and maintenance schedules. By the 1960 seconds, the entries grew more contemplative, questioning. By the final entry in 1968, there was an unmistakable note of abandonment, as if his grandfather had been waiting for something that never came. "We need to open that cabinet," his daughter said, setting a bowl of soup in front of him. "I know. But the combination, it could be anything. Maybe there's a clue somewhere in his other things." After dinner, they went through his grandfather's trunk again, this time with new purpose. The letters from his grandmother yielded nothing useful. The photograph showed only a young man in uniform, giving no hints about secret operations or buried chambers. But at the very bottom of the trunk, beneath a folded wool blanket, Cole's fingers found something they'd missed before. A smaller box, wooden, with a simple clasp. Inside was a collection of personal items. His grandfather's dog tags, still on their chain, a pocket watch that had stopped at 3:47, a folded piece of paper that turned out to be his honorable discharge papers from 1945. And underneath it all, wrapped in a scrap of cloth, a key ring. 7 keys, each one numbered with a small metal tag. And attached to the ring, a note in his grandfather's handwriting. "For Cole, if you're reading this, you were meant to find it." Cole's throat tightened. His grandfather had left this for him specifically, not for Cole's father, who died young in a car accident when Cole was just 15, not for any other family member, for Cole. "He knew," his daughter whispered, reading over his shoulder. "He knew you'd be the one to find it." The next morning, they returned to the chamber with the keys. The first 5 opened various drawers and compartments they'd noticed, but hadn't been able to access. Each revealed more pieces of the puzzle. The first drawer contained photographs, not military portraits, but candid shots of men in civilian clothes, standing at what looked like other sites. Mountains in the background, similar hatches visible in some images. His grandfather appeared in several photos, younger, standing with men who shared his serious expression. The second drawer held maps, detailed topographical maps of Montana, Wyoming, and Colorado, with locations marked using the same coding system as the logbook, K3, K9, K12, and others. Cole counted 15 marked sites in total, scattered across hundreds of miles of remote territory. The third drawer contained correspondence, letters between his grandfather and someone identified only as the director. The language was formal, almost bureaucratic, discussing the network, contingency protocols, and preservation missions. One letter from 1947 thanked his grandfather for his continued dedication to national security, even as the immediate crisis has passed. The fourth drawer made Cole's hands shake. Cash, bundles of currency from the 1942, still crisp and perfectly preserved, and beneath the bills, a small leather pouch containing gold coins. He didn't count it all, but there was easily several $1,000s here, probably worth significantly more as collectibles now. "We should secure this," his daughter said, practical as always. "Get it to a bank or—" "Not yet," Cole interrupted. "Not until we understand what this all means." The fifth drawer contained technical documents, construction specifications, ventilation system diagrams, preservation methods for long-term storage. These weren't amateur preparations. This was professional-grade engineering, built to last decades. They stood in front of the locked cabinet, the sixth key in Cole's hand. It was larger than the others, older-looking, and the metal tag attached to it bore a simple number, 6. The key turned smoothly, and the cabinet door swung open to reveal shelves packed with files. Folders organized by year, by site designation, by type of operation. Cole pulled out the first folder, dated 1943, and began to read. The documents told a story he'd never learned in history class. In the early years of World War II, with fears of invasion or sabotage running high, a secret domestic program had been initiated. Codenamed Operation Safeguard, it involved the construction of hidden supply depots across remote areas of the American West. Each site was assigned a guardian, a trusted individual who would maintain it in secret, ready to activate if the homeland came under attack. The program was designed to ensure continuity of government and survival of civilians if the worst happened. Supplies, communications, equipment, weapons, medical provisions, even gold reserves were distributed across the network. Each guardian took an oath of secrecy, knowing they might spend their entire lives maintaining sites that would never be needed. "It makes sense," his daughter said, reading over his shoulder. "Pearl Harbor scared everyone. They thought the Japanese might invade the West Coast or that saboteurs might destroy infrastructure. This was a backup plan. But the war ended in 1945, Cole said. Why did Grandpa keep maintaining this place for another 50 years? The answer came in another folder, this one dated 1946. A letter from the director explained that while the immediate threat had passed, the network would remain active as a Cold War. Contingency. New threats, same mission. The Guardians were asked to continue their watch. Cole found his grandfather's response, a carbon copy on thin paper. "I understand and will maintain Site K7 as directed. However, I request clarification on duration and eventual deactivation protocols." There was no record of a response to that request. They spent hours going through the files, piecing together the network's history. Most Guardians had been men like his grandfather, veterans, reliable, living in remote areas where sites could be hidden. Some had maintained their sites faithfully for decades. Others had apparently abandoned them or died without passing on the knowledge. One file caught Cole's attention, Site K3, Wyoming. The Guardian's name was listed, and there were notations throughout the 1950 seconds and 60 seconds about increased activity and non-standard communications. The last entry, from 1967, was marked in red ink, K3, exhibiting concerning behavior, recommend monitoring. Guardian may have become obsessive regarding mission parameters. "What do you think that means?" his daughter asked. I think it means someone took this too seriously, Cole said. Couldn't let it go even when it became clear the network was being forgotten. The seventh key remained. It was attached to a red tag that read, "Emergency only director authorization required." Cole held it up to the light. Whatever this key opened, his grandfather had considered it important enough to restrict access, even in his own notes. "Should we?" his daughter asked. Cole thought about the warning in the K3 file, about men who couldn't let go of their missions, about secrets that consumed their keepers. But he also thought about his grandfather's note, "You were meant to find it." He inserted the seventh key into the final locked compartment. Inside was a single sealed envelope, addressed in his grandfather's handwriting to "Whoever opens this chamber." The date on the seal read, 1 week before his grandfather's death. Cole's hands trembled as he broke the seal on the envelope. The paper inside was recent, written on lined notebook paper rather than the official documents that filled the rest of the chamber. His grandfather's handwriting had grown shakier with age, but the words were clear and deliberate. "To whoever finds this, I hope it's you, Cole," the letter began. Cole's voice caught as he read aloud to his daughter. "If you're reading this, then you've done what I never quite had the courage to do. You've opened everything, looked at all of it, refused to let it stay buried. I'm proud of you for that, even though I won't be there to tell you so in person. I was 23 years old when they recruited me. The country was at war, everyone was scared, and when a man in a government suit tells you that you can serve your country in a special way, you don't ask too many questions, you just say yes. They called us Guardians. We were given sites to maintain underground caches of supplies, equipment, documents. The mission was simple. If the worst happened, if invasion came or our government collapsed, these sites would help America survive and rebuild. It seemed noble, necessary. The war ended, but the mission didn't. They told us new threats had emerged. The Soviets, they said, nuclear war. We had to remain vigilant, keep the sites ready. So I did. For 70 years, I maintained Site K7, checked the supplies, kept everything in order. I told your grandmother I was hunting, or hiking, or just needed time alone. She never knew. Nobody knew. But here's what I learned too late, Cole. The mission ended long before I stopped. Maybe it ended in 1945, when the war was won. Maybe it ended in 1968, when the director disappeared and the whole network went silent. But I kept going because I didn't know how to stop. Because the oath I took felt sacred, even after everyone else had forgotten about it. Some of the other Guardians figured it out sooner than me. They walked away, moved on with their lives. But others couldn't let go. The man at Site K3, he's still there as far as I know, still waiting for orders that will never come. He lost himself in the mission, became the site rather than the guardian of it. I don't want that to be my legacy. I don't want you to remember me as a man who wasted his life keeping a secret that didn't matter anymore. Here's what you need to know. This network was real. The mission was real. But it's over. It has been for decades. The gold and cash in these chambers, the supplies, the documents, they're historical artifacts now, nothing more. The director died in 1968, and the program died with him. But some of the Guardians don't know that. Some of them are still out there, still maintaining their sites, still believing. The man at K3 is one of them. He became dangerous the last time I tried to contact him in the 1,990 seconds. Paranoid. Accused me of being a traitor for suggesting we should tell someone about the network. There's another Guardian. At Site K12, he's different. Mobile, intelligent, spent years trying to figure out the truth. Last I heard, he was visiting the old sites, documenting them. He might be able to help you if you decide to make this public. That's your decision now, Cole. You can seal this all back up, pretend you never found it. You can contact historians, make it official. Or you can do what I should have done, Find the other guardians, tell them the truth, release them from oaths that no longer bind anyone. Whatever you choose, know this: you'll make the right call. You always were smarter than me, more willing to face hard truths. I'm sorry I left this burden for you, but I trust you with it. The property is yours now. The land, the cabin, the site, all of it. Use it well. Build something better than secrets. I love you, grandson. I'm proud of the man you became, even if I never said it enough while I was alive. Your grandfather, Howard. The silence that followed was complete, except for the distant drip of water somewhere in the chamber. Cole read through the letter twice more, his grandfather's words settling into his understanding like stones dropping into still water. He was trapped, his daughter said quietly, not by the government or the mission, but by his own sense of duty. Cole nodded, unable to speak. He saw himself in those words the way he'd clung to his financial career, even as it crumbled, unable to admit failure, unable to walk away. How many years had he wasted trying to rebuild something that was already gone? The man, at K3, his daughter continued. Grandpa said he's dangerous. That was written 5 years ago, Cole pointed out. He might not even be alive anymore. Or he might be. And if we start digging into this network, contacting people, asking questions, he'll know. Cole finished. They looked at each other in the dim light of the chamber, both understanding that they'd reached a decision point. They could seal the hatch, walk away, let the past stay buried. Cole had come here to build a bunker, to hide from the world. This was the opposite. Stepping into something that connected to people and places beyond this isolated Montana valley. But his grandfather's words echoed in his mind. Release them from oaths that no longer bind anyone. These other guardians, whoever they were, deserved to know the truth. They deserved the freedom to stop waiting for orders that would never come. I want to find them, Cole said. The other guardians. Tell them what we learned. His daughter studied him carefully. This isn't about Grandpa anymore, is it? This is about you. She was right, and they both knew it. Cole had spent the last year drowning in failure, unable to see a path forward. Solving this mystery, helping people he'd never met, it gave him purpose. Maybe not the purpose he'd planned, but purpose nonetheless. I need to do something that matters, Cole admitted. Something that helps people instead of hurting them. His daughter reached out and squeezed his hand. Okay, but we do it carefully. We document everything, we leave information with someone we trust, and we don't take unnecessary risks. Agreed. They spent the rest of that day creating a complete inventory of the chamber. His daughter photographed every document, every item, every shelf. Cole organized the information chronologically, building a timeline of the network's operation. By evening, they had a clearer picture. Operation Safeguard had been established in late 1942, with sites constructed throughout 1943 and 1944. At its peak, the network included at least 20 sites across 7 states. Most had been decommissioned officially in the late 1942s, but several Guardians had continued maintaining their sites through the Cold War. By the 1962s, only a handful remained active, and after the director's disappearance in 1968, the network had fragmented completely. Site K3 in Wyoming appeared repeatedly in the later documents, always with concerning notes. The Guardian there, whose name was redacted in most files, had reportedly refused to acknowledge that the mission might be ending. He'd cut off contact with other Guardians in the early 1972s. Site K12 in Colorado was different. Its Guardian had apparently taken a different approach, maintaining contact with others, trying to gather information about the network's true status. His grandfather's last note about K12 was dated 2019. Received letter from K12 Guardian. He's still seeking answers. Told him I have none to give. So there's at least one other person out there who wants the truth, his daughter said. Maybe more, Cole replied, but K-12 sounds like our best starting point. That night, Cole couldn't sleep. He lay on the cabin's couch, staring at the ceiling, thinking about his grandfather spending 70 years keeping this secret. What had that cost him? What relationships had suffered? What parts of himself had he buried along with the supplies and documents? And what would it cost Cole to unbury them? The radio crackled to life at 3 in the morning. Cole jerked awake on the couch, disoriented by the sound. Static filled the cabin, loud enough to wake his daughter, who appeared in the bedroom doorway looking alarmed. "What is that?" she asked. Cole was already moving toward the chamber. They'd spent the previous day exploring all the equipment, and he'd discovered an old military radio set in a sealed alcove. Out of curiosity, he'd connected it to the solar power system and powered it up, not expecting anything. The frequencies it was tuned to were decades obsolete. But now, as they descended into the chamber, the radio was receiving something. Through the static came a pattern, not voices, but Morse code. Slow, deliberate, repeating. Cole grabbed a pencil and paper, his knowledge of Morse code rusty but still there from his brief stint in the Boy Scouts. He transcribed the pattern. Station K3 requesting relief. Guardian status critical. Please acknowledge. The message repeated 3 times, then fell silent. K3, his daughter whispered. The dangerous one. Cole stared at the radio, his mind racing. The message was automated, probably had been broadcasting for years, but it meant someone at K3 had set up equipment to call for help, and that equipment was still functioning. "We can't ignore this," Cole said. "Dad," Grandpa warned you, "if someone is in trouble, we have to help. That's not negotiable." His daughter's expression shifted from concern to something else. Pride, maybe, or recognition that her father had found something worth fighting for. "Then we go together," she said firmly, "and we tell someone where we're going first." They spent the morning preparing. Cole printed out all the documentation they'd photographed, sealed it in waterproof containers, and left copies with their nearest. The neighbor, a rancher 10 miles down the road who'd been friendly when they'd stopped to introduce themselves. He gave the neighbor a sealed letter with instructions to open it if they didn't return in 5 days. The drive to K3 took most of the day. The coordinates from his grandfather's maps led them deep into Wyoming's Wind River Range, where paved roads gave way to gravel, then dirt, then barely distinguishable tracks through wilderness. Cole's truck handled it better than he'd expected, but by the time they reached the general area, the sun was setting. They made camp a mile from the coordinates, not wanting to approach in darkness. His daughter built a small fire while Cole studied the maps by flashlight. The K3 site was supposed to be in a mountain valley, hidden in dense forest. According to his grandfather's notes, the Guardian there had built a small cabin above ground to make year-round access easier. "Do you think he's still alive?" his daughter asked, warming her hands over the fire. "The radio message is automated, could be broadcasting for years with no one there. Or it could mean he's there and something's wrong." They sat in silence, listening to the wind through the pines and the distant call of an owl. Cole found himself thinking about his grandfather again, about all those trips he'd taken alone to maintain the site. Had he sat in places like this, under stars like these, wondering if his mission still mattered? "Tell me about Mom," his daughter said suddenly. Cole looked up, surprised. They didn't talk about her often. The grief was still too close to the surface, even 3 years after the cancer had taken her. "What do you want to know? Would she have liked this? The adventure? The mystery?" Cole smiled despite himself. "She would have loved it. Your mother was fearless in ways I never was. When we met, I was the one with the plan, the career, the 5-year timeline. She was the one who convinced me that some of the best things in life are unplanned." "I miss her," his daughter said softly. "Me too, sweetheart. Every day." They sat together in the firelight, and Cole realized this was the first real conversation they'd had about his wife since the funeral. The financial collapse, the move to Montana, the mystery of the sights, it had all created space for grief to breathe, for both of them to process loss without the pressure of maintaining normal life. "She would have been proud of you," his daughter added, "for doing this, for not giving up." Cole felt tears sting his eyes. "I did give up. That's why we're here." "No," his daughter said firmly. "You lost everything, and instead of giving up, you found something else to fight for. That's not surrender. That's survival." The next morning, they approached the K3 coordinates carefully. Cole led the way, his grandfather's maps in hand, while his daughter followed with their emergency supplies. The forest was thick with lodgepole pine and Douglas fir, the undergrowth, dense enough that they had to force their way through in places. Then the trees opened, and they saw it. A small cabin, weathered but maintained, smoke rising from its chimney. Someone was home. Cole stopped, suddenly uncertain. They were trespassing on private property, approaching a man his grandfather had described as dangerous and paranoid. What if he reacted badly? What if... The cabin door opened. An elderly man emerged, rifle in hand, eyes sharp despite his obvious age. He had to be in his late 80s, but he moved with the steady purpose of someone who'd spent a lifetime in these mountains. "That's far enough," the man called out, his voice strong. "State your business." Cole raised his hands slowly, showing they were unarmed. "My name is Cole Brown. My grandfather was Howard Brown, guardian of Site K7 in Montana." The rifle barrel lowered slightly. "Howard's dead. Yes, sir. 5 years ago. But before he died, he left information for me. About the network. About Operation Safeguard." The man studied them for a long moment, his weathered face unreadable. Then, to Cole's surprise, his shoulders sagged and tears filled his eyes. "Someone finally came," he said quietly. "After all these years, someone finally came." He invited them inside, and the cabin's interior told a story of dedication bordering on obsession. Every surface was clean and organized with military precision. Maps covered the walls, marked with sites and dates and notes, written in cramped handwriting. The radio equipment that had sent the distress call sat in one corner, still humming. "I'm the K3 Guardian," the man said, setting his rifle aside. "Have been since 1943. Never left. Never quit." He moved to a small kitchen area and began making coffee with shaking hands. Cole and his daughter exchanged glances, both seeing the same thing. This man wasn't dangerous. He was alone and afraid and desperately hoping his sacrifice had meant something. "Sir," Cole said gently, "can you tell us what happened? Why you called for relief?" The Guardian turned, and Cole saw the exhaustion in his eyes, the kind of exhaustion that comes from carrying a burden for too long. "Because I'm dying," the man said simply. "Cancer, maybe 6 months left, and I can't leave the site unmanned. I took an oath. Someone needs to relieve me before I die." The K3 Guardian's name was Warren, and he'd been 21 years old when they'd given him this site. He served them coffee in chipped mugs and sat at his small table, hands wrapped around his own cup for warmth, despite the fire crackling in the wood stove. "I never married," Warren said. "Never had children. The mission, it was everything. They told us we were the last line of defense, that if we failed, America itself might fall. You don't walk away from that kind of responsibility." Cole watched the old man's face as he spoke, seeing not the dangerous paranoid his grandfather had described, but someone who'd given his entire life to a promise. There was a tragedy in that dedication, but also a kind of nobility that Cole couldn't ignore. "The war ended," Warren continued, "but they told us the mission continued. New enemies, same stakes. So I stayed. Years turned into decades. I kept waiting for the director to call, to tell us we'd done enough, that we could go home, but the call never came." "When did you last hear from him?" Cole asked. From the director, 1968. March of 1968. He sent a letter saying there would be a period of reorganization, that we should maintain our sights and await further instruction. Warren's eyes grew distant. I'm still waiting. Cole's daughter leaned forward. Warren, we found something at my grandfather's site, something I think you need to see. She pulled out her phone and showed him the photographs they'd taken of the sealed envelope of his grandfather's final letter. Warren put on reading glasses and studied the screen, his lips moving as he read. When he finished, his hands were shaking. Howard broke the oath, Warren said, but there was no anger in his voice, only a deep, aching uncertainty. Or he told the truth, Cole replied gently. Warren, the director, died in 1968. The network was never officially deactivated because there was no one left to deactivate it. You've been waiting for orders from a man who's been dead for over 50 years. Warren stood abruptly, moving to one of the maps on his wall. He traced his finger over marked locations, his breathing rapid. No. That can't be right. The supplies, someone kept sending supplies. Through the 90s I received deliveries. Food, equipment, radio parts. Someone was maintaining the network. Show us, Cole said. Warren led them to a storage room filled with carefully inventoried supplies. He pulled out a ledger, its pages covered with dates and descriptions. Sure enough, deliveries were logged regularly through 1995. After that, nothing. Who delivered them? Cole's daughter asked. Different people. Contractors, I assumed. They never spoke much, just left the supplies and departed. I signed for them. They left. I thought it was the director's system still functioning. Cole studied the ledger entries, something nagging at his mind. The deliveries were too regular, too organized. If the director had died in 1968, who had authorized supplies for nearly 30 more years? Warren, do you have any photographs? Pictures of the other guardians? Of the director? Warren nodded, moving to a footlocker. He pulled out an old photo album, its pages yellowed but intact. Inside were black and white photographs from the 1940 seconds and 50 seconds, then color photos from the 60 seconds. Men in casual clothes standing at various sites, training sessions, and then a photograph that made Cole's breath catch. 5 men in suits standing in front of an unmarked government building. The photo was dated 1963 on the back. Warren pointed to each man in turn. That's me, much younger. That's Howard, your grandfather. That's the K9 Guardian, the K12 Guardian, and that, he pointed to a distinguished-looking man in the center, that's Director Ashford. Cole pulled out his phone and quickly searched for the name. The results came back immediately. Director Ashford, presumed dead in boating accident, March 1968. Body never recovered. Presumed, his daughter said. Not confirmed. Warren was staring at the photograph now, something shifting in his expression. There was always something about the director. Even back then, some of us wondered. He was meticulous about contingencies, had backup plans for his backup plans. When they said he died in a boating accident, I remember thinking, that doesn't sound like him. He didn't take unnecessary risks. Cole's mind was racing. If the director had faked his death, if he'd somehow continued operating in secret, that would explain the supply deliveries continuing for decades after his supposed death. But why? And how? The K-12 Guardian, Cole said, pointing to another man in the photo. What was his name? I don't remember his first name. Last name was Winters. He was different from the rest of us. More educated, asked more questions. He never fully bought into the mission the way we did. Is he still alive? Warren nodded slowly. Last I heard, yes. He left his site in the late 70s, but he's been trying to piece together the truth about the network. Visits old sites, talks to other guardians when he can find them. He came here once, maybe 10 years ago, tried to convince me to walk away. Did he say anything about the director? He said he thought the director didn't die in that accident. Said he'd found evidence of continued operations, money moving through accounts that should have been frozen, but he couldn't prove anything. Cole looked at his daughter, seeing his own thoughts reflected in her eyes. This wasn't just a forgotten Cold War program. This was something that had continued operating in the shadows for decades, something that maybe, possibly, was still active. "We need to find Winters," Cole said. "The K-12 Guardian. He might have answers." Warren went to a file cabinet and pulled out a folder. "I have an address, Colorado, outside Durango. He sent me a letter about 5 years ago, told me to contact him if I ever wanted to talk. I never did." He handed Cole a piece of paper with an address written in neat handwriting. Cole pocketed it carefully. "Warren," Cole's daughter said gently, "what do you want to do? About your site? About the mission?" The old man looked around his cabin at the maps and equipment and supplies that had defined his entire adult life. When he spoke, his voice was quiet but steady. "I want to know the truth. And then, maybe, I want to rest." They spent the rest of the day helping Warren document his site, photographing everything just as they had at K7. As they worked, Warren told stories about the early days, about the fear that had driven the network's creation, about the slow realization that he'd given his life to something that had outlived its purpose. By evening, Warren had made a decision. He would come with them to find Winters, to get answers. Whatever time he had left, he wanted to spend it seeking truth rather than waiting for orders that would never come. As they prepared to leave the next morning, Warren took one last look at his cabin. He'd lived there for 80 years, longer than most people lived anywhere. Then he locked the door, pocketed the key, and climbed into Cole's truck without looking back. "K9 is on the way to Colorado," Warren said quietly. "The site that went dark in 2003. Maybe we should check on it." Cole met his daughter's eyes in the rearview mirror. She nodded slightly. "K9 it is," Cole agreed, turning the truck toward Colorado. The drive to K9 took 2 days, with Warren sharing stories that painted a fuller picture of Operation Safeguard. They learned about the training, the oaths, the families who never knew where their husbands and fathers disappeared to for days at a time. Warren spoke of men who'd cracked under the pressure and others who'd found meaning in the solitude. "The K9 Guardian was named Philip," Warren said as they crossed into Colorado. "Quiet man. Kept to himself even more than the rest of us. His site was in an old mining area, abandoned since the 30s. Perfect place to hide something." They reached the coordinates on the 3rd morning. The location was remote, even by Guardian standards, accessible only by a winding dirt road that hadn't seen maintenance in decades. Evidence of old mining operations dotted the hillsides, collapsed structures, rusted equipment, the skeletal remains of a company town long abandoned. "There," Warren said, pointing to a weathered building that had once been a maintenance shed. "That's where the entrance should be." They parked and approached cautiously. The building's exterior showed signs of age and weather, but also something else: recent disturbance. The padlock on the door had fresh scratches around the keyhole, and footprints in the dust near the entrance were too clear to be more than a few weeks old. "Someone's been here," Cole's daughter said quietly. They entered the building, flashlights cutting through the gloom. The interior had been stripped by time and scavengers, but Warren led them to a corner where debris had been recently cleared away. Beneath it, a hatch identical to the ones at K7 and K3. But this hatch was open, the lock broken, fresh tool marks scoring the metal. Cole's stomach tightened. "We're not alone." They descended carefully, Cole first, then his daughter, with Warren coming last, despite his age and illness. The chamber below was different from K7. Larger, more elaborate, with multiple rooms branching off the main space. And, like the building above, it had been systematically emptied. Shelves stood bare, file cabinets hung open, their contents gone. "This isn't natural decay," Warren said, his voice echoing. "Someone stripped this place." They searched the rooms methodically. Most were empty, but in the furthest chamber, Cole found something that made him call the others. A folding table held a laptop computer, its screen dark, but the power light still glowing. Next to it, a portable battery pack and a digital recorder. "Don't touch anything yet," his daughter warned. This could be evidence. Cole pulled out his phone and photographed everything from multiple angles. Then, carefully, he pressed the space bar on the laptop. The screen flickered to life, showing a simple text document filled with dates and locations, a log of some kind, tracking visits to different sites over the past 6 months. K7, February 15. Guardian, deceased 2020, site maintained but sealed. Cole read aloud. K3, March 2. Guardian active but isolated, mentally declining. K9, March 20. Site stripped, contents archived. There were entries for a dozen different sites, all recent, all documenting the status of the network. And at the bottom of the document, an entry dated 1 week ago, K7 unsealed, new activity detected, unknown party accessing site, requires investigation. "Someone's been watching us," Cole's daughter said, her voice tight. Warren moved to the digital recorder and pressed play. An elderly voice filled the chamber, clear and measured despite obvious age. "This is Guardian K12. Entry dated the 10th of April 2025. I've now visited 14 of the original 20 sites. Most are abandoned or destroyed. 3 remain maintained by original Guardians who refuse to accept that the mission has ended. 2 have been accessed by civilians, including K7, where the grandson of Guardian Howard Brown has discovered the site." The recording continued. The voice of the K12 Guardian, Winters, methodical and precise. He described his 6-month journey, documenting the network, his attempts to verify the director's fate, his growing certainty that the truth needed to be preserved before the last Guardians died and the history was lost forever. "I found evidence suggesting the director survived his supposed death in 1968, Winters' voice said. "Financial records, property transactions under assumed names, supply deliveries that continued for decades using coded accounts. If true, it means the director orchestrated one of the longest-running covert operations in American history, maintained entirely outside official channels." Warren sank into a folding chair, his face pale. He knew. Winters knew all along. The recording continued. The network represented both the best and worst of American resolve. Men willing to sacrifice everything for their country, but also a system that continued long past its usefulness because no one had the courage or authority to end it. These men deserved better than to be forgotten. There was a pause. Then Winters spoke again, his tone changing. "I've become aware that K7 has been opened by Howard Brown's grandson, Cole. Based on my research, Cole recently suffered significant personal and financial losses. He may be seeking purpose, or escape, or answers to questions about his grandfather. Whatever his motivation, his discovery changes everything. The network's existence will eventually become public knowledge." Cole felt his face flush. This stranger had researched him, knew his failures, his losses. It felt like an invasion, even as he recognized that Winters was simply being thorough. "I'm going to K7, the recording concluded. "I need to meet Cole Brown. Need to understand his intentions. If he's going to expose the network, it must be done properly. Not as conspiracy theory or scandal, but as the human story it truly is. The director taught us to plan for every contingency. This is the contingency he never planned for the truth." The recording ended with a click that seemed too loud in the underground chamber. "He's at our site," Cole said. "Right. Now, while we're here." His daughter pulled out her phone, but there was no signal this deep underground. They rushed back up the ladder, emerging into the building above. Cole tried his phone, 1 bar of signal, barely enough. He dialed the neighbor they'd left their documentation with. The phone rang 6 times before connecting. "Hello? Jim, it's Cole Brown. Has anyone been to my grandfather's property?" "Funny you should ask. Yeah, there's been an old fellow there for the past few days. Saw him going in and out of that excavation you told me about. Seemed harmless, so I didn't bother him. He left you a note. Said to call him when you got back." Cole's heart was pounding. "What did the note say?" "Hold on." He gave me a copy. There was rustling paper. Says, "Cole, I'm not there to stop you or threaten you. I'm there to help you understand. Everything you've found is true. Everything your grandfather told you is accurate. But there's more to learn, and we're running out of time. The director may have died in 1968, but his final contingency is still active. You opened the door. Now we need to walk through it together before someone else does. We'll wait at K7 for your return. Winters." Cole lowered the phone slowly, processing the message. The director's final contingency. What did that mean? "We need to go back," Warren said firmly. "Whatever Winters knows, we need to hear it." They drove through the night, taking turns at the wheel while the others slept. Cole's mind churned through possibilities. If the director had planned for eventual exposure, what form would that contingency take, and why would Winters say they were running out of time? They arrived at the Montana property just after dawn, exhausted from the 30-hour drive. The cabin looked exactly as they'd left it, but Cole's truck wasn't alone. A well-maintained Jeep sat in the clearing, a Colorado plate on its bumper. Warren climbed out slowly, his illness evident in his movements. The journey had taken a toll, but his eyes were alert, scanning the property with a guardian's practiced vigilance. The cabin door opened before they reached it. A man emerged, and Cole recognized him immediately from the photograph, older now, in his early 90s, but unmistakably the K-12 Guardian. Winters was tall and lean, with silver hair and eyes that held the sharp intelligence Warren had described. He wore practical outdoor clothing and held a coffee mug in weathered hands. "You must be Cole," Winters said, his voice matching the one from the recording. "You have your grandfather's eyes." "And Warren, it's been too long, old friend." Warren nodded slowly. "You were right. About all of it. I wish I'd been wrong." Winters gestured to the cabin. "Come inside. We have much to discuss, and I'm afraid we're working against a deadline." The interior of the cabin had been transformed into a command center. Cole's kitchen table was covered with documents, maps, and a laptop computer. Everything from the K7 chamber had been carefully organized, photographed, and catalogued. Rather than feeling violated by the intrusion, Cole felt relief. This man understood what they'd found. "I apologize for the liberty," Winters said, pouring coffee for everyone. "But when I realized you discovered the network, I knew time was critical. You did excellent work documenting everything. Your grandfather would be proud." "The recording at K9, Cole said. "You mentioned the director's final contingency. What did you mean?" Winters set down his mug and pulled a manila folder from a stack on the table. Inside was a document, old but preserved in a protective sleeve. The header read, "Operation Safeguard, Terminal Protocols, Eyes Only." "I found this 15 years ago," Winters explained, "in an archive that shouldn't have existed. The director was meticulous about planning, including planning for his own death or incapacitation. This document outlines what should happen if the network was ever compromised or exposed." Cole read through the document, his hands growing cold. The protocols were elaborate and specific. If the network's existence became known to unauthorized parties, a series of steps would automatically trigger. First, all remaining guardians would be contacted using predetermined signals. Second, all sites would be sanitized and sealed. Third, and most critically, a failsafe would activate. "What failsafe?" Cole's daughter asked, reading over his shoulder. Winters turned to a specific page marked with a yellow tab. Site K1. The original site, built in 1942 before any others, the director's personal cache. According to these protocols, if the network is exposed, K1 is programmed to release all documentation to predetermined contacts, journalists, historians, government officials. The director wanted to ensure that if the story came out, it would come out on his terms, told completely and accurately. That sounds reasonable, Cole said. Why is it a problem? Because the protocols were written assuming the network would be exposed by external forces, Soviet agents, domestic threats, investigative journalists. The fail-safe is designed to prevent the truth from being twisted or weaponized. Winter's expression darkened. But you're not an external threat. You're Howard's grandson, a Guardian's family member. The system doesn't know how to classify you. Warren leaned forward. What happens if the system releases the information? Chaos, Winters said simply. The documents include classified information from the 1,940 seconds and 50 seconds. Names of operatives, details of covert operations, financial transactions that were never officially recorded. Some of it is harmless history now, but some could still damage reputations, reveal state secrets that were meant to stay buried. And all of it will be presented without context, without the human stories behind the missions. Cole felt the weight of responsibility settling on his shoulders. How do we stop it? We don't stop it, Winters corrected. We control it. The protocols give the director's successor authority to manage the release. I've spent years establishing that I'm that successor, the last Guardian actively maintaining the mission. But I need access to K1 to implement the controlled release protocol. Where is K1? Cole's daughter asked. Winters pulled out a topographical map of Montana. His finger traced to a location in the Bob Marshall Wilderness, one of the most remote areas in the lower 48 states. Here, 3 days' hike from the nearest road, in terrain that makes all the other sites look accessible. And you need to get there how fast? Cole asked, though he already knew the answer wouldn't be good. The fail-safe has a countdown. Once it detects sustained access to any site by unauthorized parties, which it did, when you open K7, it begins a 90-day timer. After that, everything releases automatically. Winters checked his watch. We have 48 hours. The room fell silent. Warren's illness made him unable to attempt such a trek. Cole's daughter was fit, but inexperienced in wilderness survival. That left Cole and Winters, both in their late 50s and early 90s respectively. I'll go, Cole said. Tell me what needs to be done. We'll both go, Winters corrected. The site requires 2 Guardians for authentication. The director was paranoid about unauthorized access. I'll need your help, Cole. As Howard's grandson and heir to K7, you have legitimate authority. Cole's daughter shook her head. Dad, you can't. The wilderness, the timeline, it's too dangerous. It's necessary, Cole replied. He looked at Winters. What exactly do we need to do at K1? Winters explained the procedure. They would need to access the site's control room, authenticate their authority using specific protocols, and manually initiate the controlled release sequence. The documentation would then be sent to the contacts. Winters had established reputable historians and journalists who would tell the story properly. The director was right about one thing, Winters said. This story deserves to be told. These men, your grandfather, Warren, all the others, they gave their lives to something they believed in. That sacrifice shouldn't be forgotten or mocked. But it needs context, understanding, humanity. Warren spoke up, his voice weak but determined. I want to come. I know I can't make the hike, but I should be there. You'll be here, Winters said gently. Someone needs to maintain K7, to preserve the documentation, to be ready to verify our story when we return. That's a Guardian's duty, Warren. Will you accept it? Warren's eyes filled with tears, but he nodded. For the first time in decades, someone had given him a mission he could complete, a purpose with an end in sight. They spent the rest of the day preparing. Winters had gear already packed. He'd been planning this contingency since learning of Cole's discovery. Cole gathered his own supplies while his daughter created detailed maps and emergency protocols. If they didn't return in 5 days, she would contact the authorities they designated. That evening, the four of them sat on the cabin's porch, watching the sun set over the mountains. Warren told stories about the early days, about men who'd believed they were protecting something precious. Winters added context about the director, painting a picture of a man whose dedication to his country had bordered on obsession. He wasn't evil, Winters said. He was a true believer who couldn't imagine that his mission might outlive its necessity. In that way, he trapped all of us. But we can free ourselves now, Cole said. Yes, Winters agreed. We can. They left at first light, packs heavy with supplies and equipment. Cole's daughter drove them to the trailhead, her face tight with worry, but her voice steady as she went over the emergency protocols one more time. 5 days, she said firmly. If I don't hear from you in 5 days, I'm sending help. Cole hugged her, feeling the familiar fear of failing to protect her, warring with a new emotion trust. She was capable, strong, and if something happened to him, she would handle it. Take care of Warren, he said. I will. You take care of yourself. The trail was brutal from the start. Winters moved with surprising endurance for a man in his 90s, his pace steady and measured. Cole struggled more, his years behind a desk evident in every steep climb. But he pushed forward, driven by something deeper than physical strength. They hiked through wilderness that hadn't changed in centuries. Dense forests gave way to alpine meadows, then rocky terrain that required careful navigation. Winters led confidently, following landmarks he'd memorized decades ago. On the second day, as they climbed above the tree line, Winters finally spoke about the director. I met him only 3 times, Winters said, his breath even despite the altitude. Once during initial recruitment, once at a network meeting in 1965, and once in early 1968, just weeks before his supposed death. What was he like? Brilliant, paranoid, absolutely convinced that America needed this network to survive. He talked about contingencies within contingencies, about planning for scenarios most people couldn't imagine. Winters paused to drink from his canteen. The last time I saw him, he seemed different, tired maybe, or resigned. He told me that sometimes the hardest part of any mission is knowing when it's over. Do you think he really died in 1968? I think he wanted to, Winters replied. Whether he succeeded or whether he spent years in hiding, maintaining the network through proxies, I may never know for certain. But the man I met in 1968 looked like someone ready to let go. They camped that night below a ridge, the stars overhead impossibly bright. Cole lay in his sleeping bag, thinking about his grandfather, maintaining K7 for 70 years, about Warren waiting at K3 for orders that never came, about the director creating a system that outlived his ability to control it. The third morning brought them to K1's location. It was hidden in a box canyon, accessible only through a narrow defile that would be invisible unless you knew where to look. The entrance wasn't a buried hatch, but a natural cave mouth, reinforced with concrete and hidden behind carefully placed boulders. Winters moved the boulders with practiced efficiency, revealing a steel door set into the rock face. Unlike the other sites, this one showed no rust, no deterioration. It had been maintained recently. Someone's been here, Cole said. I have, Winters admitted. Every few years, I check on it, making sure the fail-safe is still functional, that everything remains secure. The door required 2 keys, turned simultaneously. Winters handed one to Cole, his grandfather's key from the K7 site. They inserted them together and turned. The door opened into a tunnel carved through solid rock, lit by LED lights powered by some hidden generator. They walked for 50 yards before emerging into a chamber that took Cole's breath away. It was massive, far larger than the other sites. Multiple rooms branched off a central space that held rows of filing cabinets, computer servers, and what looked like a communications hub. Everything was pristine, climate-controlled, maintained by automated systems that had run for decades. The director's legacy, Winters said quietly. Everything he knew, everything he planned, all preserved here. They found the control room in the back. Inside, a computer system from the early 2000s, ancient by modern standards, but still functional. Winters sat at the keyboard and began typing commands, his fingers remembering protocols learned decades ago. "The countdown is at 43 hours, he said, studying the screen. "We made it with time to spare." He walked Cole through the mummed authentication process. It required both of them to input codes, verify their guardian status through questions only someone with access to the sites would know, and finally place their hands on biometric scanners that had been programmed with data from decades past. "How does it have my biometric data?" Cole asked. "It doesn't. It's reading your genetic markers and comparing them to your grandfather's sample from the 1940 seconds. The system recognizes you as Howard's direct descendant." Winters smiled slightly. The director thought of everything. The screen flashed green. Authentication accepted. Initiating controlled release protocol. Select distribution method. Winters pulled out a flash drive containing the contact list he'd spent years compiling. Historians, journalists, even government officials he trusted to handle the information responsibly. He uploaded the list and selected Staged Release. The documentation would go out over weeks, allowing each piece to be properly contextualized before the next was revealed. "One more step," Winters said. He turned to Cole. "The system needs a final authorization, a statement from a guardian explaining why the network is being revealed. Your grandfather should have been the one to do this, but he's gone. As his heir and the person who discovered K7, that responsibility falls to you." Cole sat at the computer, the cursor blinking in a text field. He thought about everything he'd learned, about the men who'd sacrificed normal lives for a mission they believed in, about his grandfather carrying secrets for 70 years. He typed, "Operation Safeguard was created by people who loved their country and feared for its future. The men who served as guardians gave everything to protect something they held sacred. This network is being revealed not to embarrass them or expose conspiracy, but to honor their sacrifice and ensure their story is told with the truth and dignity it deserves. They were not villains or fools. They were patriots who carried their burden in silence. They deserve to be remembered." He hit enter. The screen processed for a moment, then displayed. "Authorization accepted. Controlled release will begin in 24 hours. All sites will be sealed and marked for historical preservation. Guardian protocols officially terminated." Winters exhaled slowly, decades of tension releasing from his shoulders. It's done. The mission is finally over. They spent the night in K1, too exhausted to begin the return journey. In the morning they would hike out, return to K7, and wait for the story to emerge into the world. For the first time in his life, Cole felt like he'd completed something that mattered. 6 months had passed since they'd returned from K1. The story had emerged exactly as Winters had planned, measured, contextualized, treated with the seriousness it deserved. News outlets had covered Operation Safeguard not as conspiracy theory, but as forgotten history, a testament to cold, war-era dedication and the complex legacy of national security. Cole stood on the porch of his grandfather's cabin, watching his daughter stack firewood for the coming winter. She'd moved into the cabin permanently, finding purpose in the remote Montana property that neither of them had expected. The spare bedroom had become her studio, where she painted landscapes between her shifts at the small hospital 2 towns over. "Dad," "The historians will be here in an hour," she called. Cole nodded, checking his watch. The university team had been coming regularly, documenting the K7 site for their archive. They'd been respectful, careful, treating his grandfather's legacy with the dignity Winters had insisted upon. The cabin itself had been restored over the past months. New roof, reinforced foundation, updated solar panels that provided enough power for modern necessities. Cole lived in a small apartment he'd rented in the nearest town, working as a consultant for the historical documentation project. It wasn't his old career, but it paid enough and gave him something his previous work never had, the sense that he was preserving something valuable. Warren had passed away 3 months ago, peacefully, in a hospice facility where Cole and his daughter had visited him regularly. In his final weeks, Warren had told his story to researchers, finally releasing the burden he'd carried for 8 decades. At his funeral, attended by a handful of historians and the few family members who could be located, Warren had been honored not as a relic of paranoia, but as a man who'd kept his promises. The K3 site had been preserved as a historical landmark, Warren's cabin maintained exactly as he'd left it. Visitors could now see how one man had lived his entire life in service to a mission, and while some found it sad, others saw nobility in his dedication. Winters had become something of a celebrity in historical circles. At 92, he gave lectures about Operation Safeguard, always emphasizing the human element, the ordinary men who'd done extraordinary things in silence. He'd visited K7 twice since their return, each time bringing new researchers or documentary filmmakers who wanted to understand the network. Cole walked down to the excavation site where the K7 chamber had been transformed into a proper museum exhibit. Glass panels now covered the entrance, protecting it while allowing visitors to see inside. His grandfather's logbook, the maps, the photographs, all were displayed with careful notation explaining their historical context. A memorial plaque had been installed near the entrance. Cole read it again, though he'd memorized the words Site K7, Guardian, Howard Brown, 1943 to 2013. In honor of those who served in silence, protecting a nation that would never know their names. The date had been adjusted after further research revealed his grandfather had maintained the site until just months before his death, longer than anyone had realized. "He never stopped," Cole said aloud to the empty forest. "No, he didn't." Winter's voice came from behind him. Cole turned to find the old man approaching, moving carefully with a walking stick, but still remarkably spry. "Your grandfather understood something the rest of us took decades to learn, that the mission wasn't really about the sites or the supplies. It was about keeping faith with the oath we'd taken." "Was it worth it?" Cole asked. "All those years?" Winters considered the question carefully. "For Howard, I think it was. He had a family, a life, but he also had purpose. The site gave him something to protect, something that connected him to a larger story. That's not nothing." They stood together, looking at the memorial. Cole thought about his own journey, the collapse of his career, the desperate flight to Montana, the accidental discovery that had changed everything. 6 months ago, he'd been a man drowning in failure. Now, he was someone who'd preserved history, honored his grandfather's memory, and found meaning in unexpected places. "I got a call from the Smithsonian," Winters said. "They want to create a permanent exhibit about Operation Safeguard. Asked if you'd be willing to loan some of your grandfather's personal effects. What did you tell them?" "That, I'd ask you. But Cole, they're also asking if you'd consider speaking about what it was like to discover the site, to learn your grandfather's story. They want the family perspective." Cole's first instinct was to refuse. Public speaking, especially about something so personal, felt daunting. But then he thought about his daughter's words from months ago. "You didn't give up. You found something else to fight for." "I'll do it," he said. "Grandpa's story deserves to be told completely." That evening, after the historians had finished their work and departed, Cole and his daughter sat on the porch as the sun set over the mountains. The air had the crisp edge of approaching autumn, and somewhere in the distance an elk bugled. "Mom would have loved this," his daughter said quietly. "The adventure, the mystery, all of it." "She would have," Cole agreed. "She always said the best things in life were the ones you didn't plan for." "Do you think Grandpa planned for you to find the site?" Cole pulled out the note that had been with the keys. "For Cole, if you're reading this, you were meant to find it." He'd kept it in his wallet, a reminder that sometimes the paths we're meant to walk only become clear in hindsight. "I think he hoped I would," Cole said. "Not when I was successful and confident, but when I needed something to believe in. He gave me that gift." They sat in comfortable silence as the stars emerged, the same stars his grandfather had seen from this same porch for 70 years. Cole thought about legacy, not just what we leave behind, but what we choose to reveal, what we decide matters enough to preserve. His phone buzzed with a message from Winters. "The last piece of documentation releases tomorrow. After that, we can truly say the mission is complete. Thank you for seeing it through." Cole typed back, "Thank you for showing me how." He put the phone away and looked at his daughter, at the restored cabin, at the land that had been in his family for generations and would remain so for generations to come. Some journeys begin with loss, but if you're lucky, they end with something found. The morning of the museum opening arrived with clear skies and cool mountain air. Cole stood in front of the mirror in his apartment, adjusting his tie and barely recognizing the man looking back at him. A year ago, he'd been someone else entirely broken, ashamed, running from a life that had collapsed around him. Today, he was the primary consultant for the Operation Safeguard historical project, preparing to speak at the opening of an exhibit that would preserve his grandfather's legacy. His daughter knocked on the door. "Ready?" "As I'll ever be." They drove to the regional museum together, the same route Cole had taken a year ago when he'd first fled to Montana. Then he'd been looking backward, desperate to escape. Now he was looking forward, carrying history with him, but no longer trapped by it. The museum parking lot was already filling with cars. Winters had flown in from Colorado, and researchers who'd worked on documenting the network had come from across the country. Even a few distant relatives of other Guardians had made the journey, wanting to see their family members honored. Inside, the exhibit was more extensive than Cole had imagined. The centerpiece was a recreation of a Guardian site, complete with authentic supplies and equipment from K7. But surrounding it were the human stories, photographs of the Guardians, letters to their families, journal entries that revealed their doubts and dedication. Warren's cabin had been recreated in miniature, showing how one man had lived his entire adult life in service to a promise. Cole found Winters standing in front of a display showing the 1963 photograph, the 5 Guardians, and the director. Someone had researched each man, adding their stories beneath their faces. His grandfather's section included photos Cole had provided, showing Howard as husband, father, grandfather, a complete life, not just a secret keeper. "They did well," Winters said, "told the whole story, not just the conspiracy angle." Grandpa would have appreciated that. The ceremony began at noon. The museum director spoke about the importance of preserving complicated history, about honoring dedication, even when we might question the systems that demanded it. A historian gave context about Cold War America, the fears that had driven programs like Operation Safeguard, the psychological toll on those who'd served in silence. Then it was Cole's turn. He approached the podium, looking out at the assembled crowd. He saw his daughter in the front row, pride evident in her eyes. Saw Winters sitting beside her, the last living Guardian, witness to 8 decades of American history. Saw strangers who'd come because they were interested in the story or because they valued preservation of the past. "My grandfather never told me about Site K7, Cole began, his voice steady. He never told anyone. For 70 years, he kept that secret, maintained that sight, and waited for orders that never came. When I discovered what he'd hidden, my first reaction was confusion. Why keep this secret so long? Why not reveal it, claim recognition for his service? He paused, gathering his thoughts. I understand now. My grandfather wasn't keeping secrets out of shame or paranoia. He was keeping a promise. In a world where promises are often broken, where commitments are abandoned when they become inconvenient, he kept his word. That meant something to him. It meant everything. Cole looked at the photograph of his grandfather, young and serious in his Duthus uniform. Operation Safeguard was built on fear of invasion, of collapse, of losing everything we valued as Americans. But it was maintained by something else: duty, honor, the belief that some things are worth protecting, even if no one ever knows you protected them. He felt emotion rising in his throat, but pushed forward. These men, my grandfather, Warren, Winters, and all the others, they gave their lives to something they believed mattered. Some might say they were foolish, that they wasted years on a mission that became obsolete. But I've learned that purpose isn't measured by recognition or success. It's measured by commitment, by showing up day after day, year after year, doing what you promised you'd do. Cole's voice grew stronger. A year ago, I lost everything. My career, my savings, my sense of who I was. I came to my grandfather's land looking for escape, maybe for an ending. Instead, I found a beginning. I found a story that needed telling, a legacy that deserved preservation, and a reminder that what we build, whether it's a career, a family, or a secret network of supply caches, matters less than how we build it. With integrity, with dedication, with honor. He looked directly at his daughter. My grandfather left me more than property. He left me an example of what it means to keep faith with your commitments, even when the world moves on and forgets why those commitments mattered. In honoring his story, I've learned to honor my own, not the success or failure, but the willingness to keep trying, to find new purpose when old purposes fade. Cole concluded by reading from his grandfather's final letter, the words that had guided him through this entire journey. I'm proud of you, Cole. You'll know what's right. Grandpa, Cole said quietly, I hope I did right by you. The applause that followed was warm and genuine. People approached afterward, thanking him for sharing his grandfather's story, for ensuring these men wouldn't be forgotten. Winters shook his hand firmly, his eyes bright with emotion he didn't try to hide. That evening, Cole and his daughter returned to the cabin one last time before he had to drive back to town. The property had been designated a historical site, but they'd been granted lifetime access, able to visit whenever they wanted. They walked to his grandfather's grave, located on a hillside overlooking the valley. The memorial stone they'd placed there was simple: Howard Brown, guardian of Site K7, keeper of promises. We did it, Grandpa, Cole said aloud. Your story is told, your sacrifice is honored. His daughter placed wildflowers on the grave, then slipped her hand into Cole's. They stood together as the sun set, 3 generations connected by land, by blood, by secrets revealed and burdens lifted. Cole thought about the year that had passed, about the man he'd been and the man he'd become. Loss had brought him here, but purpose had kept him. His grandfather had left him more than a mystery to solve. He'd left him a path back to himself. Some secrets, Cole realized, are worth keeping. Others are worth sharing. The wisdom is knowing the difference.